Heather, was it Heather that was sharing all these are the different things that we're doing? And then I remember it being stated that we don't really have a way to measure this. So what am I thinking of when we had that presentation on what are we doing for our struggling learners? And it was at a board retreat or maybe a study session. But I think we were in this room, so I think it was a board retreat.
What I'm remembering is that because there are a number of things that are going into the work, it's hard to isolate one strand and say this is not effective. It's sort of a package deal. So that's what I remember her saying, was that it was difficult to.
And one of the big, and this is the question that just popped in my head, that the idea of the individual interventions that are getting down, to the student level, that is a relatively new way of approaching it, right? Is that just, we're just 2 years into that?
Well, that's the whole MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of supports. We're pretty, some buildings have been more sophisticated in that arena than other buildings, but as far as trying to be systematic about that in all schools with sort of a district framework around it, that's a pretty new approach for us as well. But I mean, that's something that just getting all of our schools on board with MTSS is probably a 3 to 5 year process in and of itself, much less 3 to 5 years until you are able to assess what the results are. But what we should be able to see, at least in shorter benchmarks, are do we have ways of identifying which students are getting it and which students aren't, and then do we have identified pathways of intervention for those students that need more support. I think another, talking about kind of research and best practice, another one that I think is going to come headlong this year is going to be the whole issue of challenge at the junior high and the middle level. There's a body of research that is very
philosophical divide there.
It is, and
It's like nature versus nurture debate. You know what I'm saying? Maybe.
Well, I think it's heterogeneous versus homogeneous grouping is really what the question is, and that's there may be research that says one thing, and there will be tremendous pressures in the opposite direction.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
It's constant.
In a nutshell,
They will
explain
never
that
come
issue, the issue that you have in a nutshell. Is it changing the,
So right now we have a challenge program at our junior high level. It's a self-select, but
Okay.
students can opt in. There's a thought out there among some of our staff that what it creates in the non-challenge courses are by and large underserved populations
Okay.
that are more challenging to teach and that dilute or don't have the advantage of a more broadly based group of peers
Sure.
in their
that
classes.
makes sense. Okay.
And so that's being addressed by our middle school task force, and I think they're
Okay.
pretty much leaning in the direction as we transition to middle schools. Heterogeneous grouping is the way to go. Well, that's going to be a significant political issue
Sure.
in our
Yeah,
district,
right,
as we
right.
have numbers of parents and families who very much want their children to be in
Continuous
courses that they
knowledge,
perceive
yeah.
are excellent, which is
Yeah.
sort of why we have the
But
challenge.
do we have our
program we have
own
now.
research show, I guess that is my question, do we have our own, when we implement these programs, do we have a mechanism that triggers, I know we get our performance, our performance measures, is that what we call them? But do we have a mechanism that we have in our school district that triggers some type of way to research and show, like, how do we know whether this works in our district, the challenge? Like what,
So I'll just think out loud, because I don't have an answer.
more than anecdotal, do you know?
Right,
what I'm saying?
that's
Or
what
what
I'm going
teachers are
to think
thinking.
out loud, because I've had, my kids have managed to try them all, the options, honors and challenge and IB and whatever, and the difficulty would be, and right, every kid in your household is different.
For sure.
And for me to articulate this challenge English class was beneficial, and it wouldn't have been beneficial for my child had they been in regular. I mean, I have some anecdotal, but I don't know how statistically, because some of it was the teacher, right?
Yeah,
It was the teacher that turned the kid on, and how they created the class, and then, an honors class that did nothing. And so how would you yeah, I don't know how you would
I don't-
create
yeah.
Well,
data
and-
that would.
And this is a great example, we'll just go down this road a little bit, because there's actually two discussions here at play. It's a curriculum discussion and a grouping discussion of students. And so how do you separate, because we could do one thing with curriculum and one thing with grouping, how do you separate the data of is it the curriculum that's helpful, is it the grouping of students that's helpful, you know, and how do you,
But I think this is where you have this is where, right, if I were spending full time as a researcher, being able to figure out a way, could I do mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative, I think that's a job for,
Well, then the question is, what are we looking for, right? Because my kids, if they were here, they would argue the benefit of challenge or honors wasn't the curriculum, it was that the rest of the kids in the class wanted to learn and they didn't have to waste time dealing with, not behavior, but just the kids that weren't interested in it.
So I'd like to
Yeah,
bring
no,
this
we're
back
gonna be-
to a little bit higher level.
How do you?
And I mean, this is something that you've all actually mentioned a couple of times, which is what is the information that helps inform your decisions as a
right.
board? How do you get it?
Yeah.
How do you deal with conflicting information? That's really where, I mean, this is just one example. Now, it sounds like you have a task force working on this, is that correct?
Well,
The junior high?
there is.
Or is
There
it-
are task forces
Okay.
working on transitions, and
Okay.
one of them is the middle school task force, and they're basing their philosophy on research that's been done, but it will clash with
Current practice.
current practice and desire from many parents.
Is it
So-
a well-rounded task force? Does it have parents
Yeah.
on it?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
yeah,
all
so,
our task forces
okay,
do. Yeah.
okay, good.
and is the research, and not that this is a negative pro one way or the other, but is the research our own studies that have been conducted or new studies that have come based on challenge doesn't work? Like, is it looking at
Well, it's
how's it
based
worked in
on-
our district or how does it work out there?
It's based on what's the ideal philosophy for a middle school.
Okay.
And how, if you're talking about it being not just a mini high school, which is what we have right now as junior highs, but as a more nurturing, more transitional stage between elementary and high school, it's just a very, very different model from what we have now. So I anticipate that will be a major clash.
So you as a board really have that challenge of figuring out what research do you need, where do we get it, what do we do when there's conflicting?
And I think
Research?
I think it's not what research we want to see either. I mean, I think as parents, we might want, I mean, my son was in IB and it was it was nice for him to have a challenge classes. So I think that there's some of those internal things that are going to have to be
Personal
addressed as
experiences.
well. And yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
And I remember, and I don't have the exact numbers, but that the amount of data that we are gaining as a society, that every 2 to 3 days, we gain as much as we did from the beginning of time where we started collecting
Isn't that
data
awful?
to 2005. So every
Yeah.
2 to 3 days, we reproduce that much data. So
Yeah.
how do you determine what's valuable data and what's, and I think of like our challenge, it's only been around 3 or 4 years, so not really long enough to do an internal longitudinal data that would produce us reliable.
And a lot of our teachers would argue that you've got a unfair playing field from the very beginning because the classes aren't randomly assigned.
Right.
So you have certain students who are selecting into challenge courses who may have a different trajectory of achievement than the students who wouldn't choose to opt into a challenge course. So you can't necessarily start them from a baseline and measure them and say,
Right, well, and I think that gets back to Kimberly's point of how do you determine what's a research study that's been done where you don't, you know, all other things being equal kind of moment, how do you do that when there's so much out there? And then, of course, you know, we read all the hysteria about that. There was just that report on the psychology studies that there's so much need to publish and, you know, issues there. And it's not just psychology,
Yeah.
but
So
any.
what
So
is
how
your
do you
board's,
decide?
what would you as a board like to see for yourselves in terms of a goal or a next step, in terms of figuring this out? You know, what information do we need? What do you do with conflicting information? Is there a process that needs to be put in place for that for you as a board? Or is it, really establishing what your protocols are based on, you know, when we get information in, this is what we do with it. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there, because
Well, I think good researchers, and we're not necessarily the researchers, and not
Sure.
sure you might not be the researcher either, but we'll always look at the conflicting data.
Right.
And I mean, you have to be able to talk about I'm not just gonna put out a study that just looks at, so I don't think that that necessarily is something to be for knowing that conflicting data is
Right.
important, but why is this?
more compelling, maybe.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, right.
So I don't think, I mean, I think that's important to see both those, but I keep going back to this, and I'm not sure that I'm hearing everyone say this, program evaluation, how do we look at, where do we have the mechanism that allows us to evaluate what we're doing, and then look at new research and try to match those two. It's not always gonna be quantifiable, I think that's part of the thing, you know, on the psychology side, I'm used to it being okay, and I think education is like this to a certain extent. I'm okay with it being partly qualitative. You know, I know the hard sciences are, but when you're dealing with humans and people, you can't always get everything into hard data, but you can mix methods, right? And that's what they did in the municipal league.
Right.
I would look at their methodology and say some of it's off, you know, but, you know, again, you could argue some of their data, but what I'm saying is they still mixed methods. They did focus groups, just like what we're doing with our diversity training. Focus groups, you know, interviews and surveys, you know, and for us that could mean different things, like I don't know whether it's grades, I don't know whether it's, you know, percentage of students that, I know for me, I was an extremely bright student. I was put in the highest level math classes in 7th grade and I self-selected out of them. You know, and for reasons that had nothing to do with how smart I was, you know, so I think there's both sides to that, what you guys are saying. I mean,
Well, and I think it all gets back to
DJ self-selects out of them sometimes, and DJ's brilliant, and sometimes he just doesn't want 5 AP classes, you know?
But how, so I guess what I'm hearing is how do we as a board determine when we're using data, how we're collecting data, given that all the complications and layers complexity to
Right.
that, so that we're not, this is, you know, somebody comes to us and said, oh, I found this study, this is what you should be doing. I mean, I think of like food, right? You know, avocados were bad, and now they're good. Right? I don't
You can
want-
get paralyzed from too much data, so the
Right,
question
right,
is,
for
how does your board do that? You know,
Right, exactly.
Right.
How do we, and not end up upending the system on a most recent study that turns out 5 years later, oh, oops.
And keeping in mind that we are not the practitioners. I mean, we are not the experts. We're not the content experts, and we're not the,
And you're at a strategic level.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly.
Right.
So,
Strategic
so
level.
figuring out what in that is a board goal, an actual board goal, and not just more stuff that we're gonna ask the district to do
Okay,
is, what I'm trying to.
so can we sit on this one for the moment? So what I wrote is we need a mechanism to evaluate what we're doing or what programs are in place, compare with research to make decisions, mixed info and data are needed in that. And let's look and see how this relates to some of the goals that we work on. Is that an okay stopping place for everybody? Because I want to make sure we get on to some of the rest of it. So have we tackled this one? Regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies for closing achievement gaps to maximize their effectiveness. We address some of the ways that
I
you as a
think we still have
board.
open, you know, the information gathering
Mhm.
question. I think
Right.
that was the underlying discussion about strategy.
Right,
But for talking about budget evaluation, I think it makes sense.
okay, okay, sounds good. Let's look at one more, okay? So let's think about which one you want.
So what do we-
So this one we just tackled right here. And one thing I will tell you that I did write down up here, out of these 5 standards, standard 4 was the one you all identified yourselves as strongest at. So I would suggest we look at maybe one from standard 1 or standard 5, which are the 2 where you identified yourselves as the weakest, or, you know, those are the lowest scores that were given. So, you know, I would maybe suggest question 66, 67 and 68, or questions 13, 14, 15, 18, and 22. if that's not throwing too much at you.
What was the first one you said, 67?
Yeah, so it would be this one potentially, or any of these. So that would be 13, 14, 15.
Yeah, we just
19 and 22.
Run that way.
There's an awful lot of them
I
right in here.
Oh, yeah, we did talk about
Just
that.
know what you-
Yeah, I think, that some of these really involve those same themes.
Right.
Yeah.
The common theme that I saw through several of those areas was communicating as a board with the public
Okay.
and how we do that.
What number is that?
It was several. It
There's
was
some that's
question
Well,
6,
out of those
7,
groupings.
27, and it was
18
70.
definitely.
Like 67 through 70. were all
Yeah.
about communicating
Yeah, and
with the
18
public,
as
yeah.
well.
I mean, there were, it just was threaded through many of them.
So 67 is ensuring the public is well informed of the board's roles and responsibilities. And then if we went back to 13.
We already talked about that one, that was governance using policies, so we already discussed that.
Okay, so we've covered that one.
But I think it's kind of hard to break them down into the exact benchmark, because I think
Yeah.
they kind of do thread in and out of them.
They do.
Yeah. So I don't think it's like necessarily,
And then 6, Tricia, was provide information to the public that supports board discussions and
Mhm.
decisions. There was another one that was.
You know, question 18
several
is,
that-
question 18 is an interesting one, just because you all agreed you do it some of the time. So just looking at these, that was one, as I looked through this, that I tagged, because I thought that would be an interesting one to discuss. Now, the discussion time is yours, so you don't need to necessarily take my opinion on this. The other one that was all yellow, so, you know, question 17 was mostly yellow, 18 was all yellow. The other one that was all yellow was question 21, which is using a collaborative process that results in a well-informed decision-making, or well-informed problem-solving and decision-making. So I don't know if those were identified as by a couple of you. 21 wasn't up there. 22 was sharing responsibility for orientation. So as a group, why don't you figure out which one would you really like to tackle? Amy?
I am looking to pull out themes. So there's internal amongst the board communication things popping up, and then board with the greater community things popping up. So in terms of which one we discuss, I think both of them are relevant and helpful conversations for us to have.
Which one specifically? Which
Oh, I have to
numbers?
pick one?
Well, or benchmark,
Okay.
a group of,
Just more broadly.
Yeah, more broad. If you
Yeah,
wanna state it
I wasn't
broadly.
picking a specific benchmark.
Okay, so state broadly to me what it is then. And I'm gonna go around and ask each of you.
If I was to prioritize, just because I think we could talk about this more, I'm going to talk about collaboration.
Collaboration with them.
Communication and collaboration.
Okay. How
I'd
about
like to talk about.
I didn't do that well.
I had to.
Apparently I do. No, I'm fine now, thanks.
So
Okay.
that is benchmark F. Organize an effective and collaborative team.
1F.
1F.
Okay, everybody gets a vote here. So benchmark F, which is board collaboration and communication.
Well, the specific, that's kind of how I sum it up, but the specific benchmark is working as an effective and collaborative.
Okay, Kimberly, how about you? What would you like to see us talk about?
we're on standard 5. And it could either be benchmark B or C. I think that they're really
So
kind of the same.
community engagement
yeah, community engagement, because I think we have really different ways of knowing what that
Since
means
when that
and
wasn't
knowing.
making sense.
Huh?
I was a benchmark for going.
I know, but-
See that, okay, 5 makes
And I
sense.
think without having another one of our board members here, it's kind of like, do I do anything that we need to talk about that? I think it's harder to talk about that without someone.
Without the whole board.
Integral to our board and has a stronger voice.
Okay. So, standard 5, then we're looking at.
It could be, honestly, it could be either one. If I had to pick one, B. Both questions. Because I think we have higher, lower levels in B, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Less green.
Less green. Okay. Jen?
It's difficult, we have everyone present. But I think the communication and collaboration aspect is pretty important to everything else.
Okay, so,
Wait, did you say Cindy?
yeah, I was just, but, yeah, so Sandy, go ahead, and then I have a question for you all. Sorry. What, shall I talk first? Well, my question would be this. 2 of you have said this is a difficult conversation to have without all 5 board members being here. Or maybe not difficult, difficult's probably the wrong word, less effective than it would be if all 5 board members were here. So I'll just throw that out there. 2 of you have said that at this point, which doesn't mean we can't talk about it, but just consider that, I guess, as we're looking at the 2 different, or maybe 3. What do you think?
I'm trying to think how to say it, because I was looking at 18, but in conjunction with, so that's standard 1 benchmark E. But in conjunction with that overall conversation of how we communicate, but not only with each other, we're the leaders, right? So we're role modeling how we expect others to communicate within the district. So that kind of that conversation of not only collaborating and communicating among ourselves, but how then that is then our expectation of our community.
How we interact with the community.
How we interact with the community, how we communicate with them, and how we expect within our district people to communicate with each other.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there are kind of 2 sides of the same coin. We're looking at how do you interact with each other, how do you work collaboratively as a board or not, and then how do you include the community or not in that collaboration. Is that right?
Yeah, well, and just, we're telling our 6 and 7-year-olds, you need to learn how to work together, right? We do turn and talk and all that, then we should be operating the same way we expect our students to operate.
Okay.
That's just my perspective.
We do grapple with slightly more challenging issues, don't we?
I don't.
Although not always. Give me my toy.
I've said in some classes.
Yeah.
They turn and talk about calculus, I'm not sure I can grapple that.
So other thoughts on this? I'm not going to decide for you. I would like the 4 of you to think about which of these would you really like to dive into next. And I'd like to spend probably only about 15 to 20 minutes on this next one.
I personally think that they're both, they intertwine.
Intertwine?
So I mean, I
Okay.
think,
Okay, so let's
because we are communicating with each other in the public. So we are,
Right.
in effect, communicating to the public when we communicate with each other.
Well, this
So right now, we're being recorded, so the public's going to see this interaction.
Right.
But I think
Exactly.
that's, so this is, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, because I don't think most of the public does see this interaction. And from my perspective, how we communicate, I think that was more in benchmark, or in stream 1. But communication of our rationale to the public, communication of what we do to the public, communication of our roles to the public, all of that is a different thing than the communication, than the internal communication or what gets videotaped. Because most people in the community don't access the videotape, that's the reality.
Okay.
So there's a large significant percentage of the public that we are not reaching, I think, with any
type of.
Well, there's
Other
always,
than district communication.
and there's always
That's
a
different.
large percentage of every communication that doesn't come to board meetings too, as you all know. It's not like our board meetings are full of thousands of people, generally. So what which probably is a good thing, although, you know, part of you wishes that your community understood more of what you're doing and what your role is. So
That's one of the
And
questions.
so that's part of
What's that?
standard 5,
Yes.
as well,
One of the
engaging the community.
Yeah.
How do you, what did it
How do you
say?
communicate?
Ensure the public is well informed of the board's rules. That was question 67.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So I'm seeing this discussion as, yeah, I mean, again, this is a really big one. But how do we communicate and work together?
But the reality is that me, Amy, and Sandy are moving forward for the next 2 years together. So while we all need to be able to work together in the next 2 months, because we have big issues coming up, the reality is us three, along with the 2 people that come on, are going to, I mean, you know, we'll be the new core,
Right.
Right.
essentially. And that's not dismissing Dawn and Janet by any means.
No, it's a reality, yeah, I understand that, yeah. You definitely, you're looking at a short term, because this is the short term board. Long term, there's a different group.
But, I mean, I think I
moving forward.
did, again, I'm sorry. I tried.
No, go ahead.
Again, identifying it as a goal for the year is something that we could improve upon perhaps. You know, and then working with the new board members on, you know, going forward. I think it's one thing to talk about it on a goal level and in terms of how we implement it. If we're gonna narrow it down to how the board interacts, or even how the board interacts with the community, talking with it on a strategic goal level, and then start to get really specific after we find out who else is on the board. I mean, that might be a good way to approach it. You know, it's a tricky thing, and I can see, since I've never gone through this board member transition before, but I can see where you don't want to lose, you definitely want to make way for the voices of folks who are coming, but you don't want to lose the learning that the previous board had, you know, in terms, especially when you're talking about continuous improvement, which is something we talk about a lot. You definitely want to keep in mind, you know, areas that we've seen that need improving, but perhaps not getting down into the weeds until after you have everyone.
Okay. And goal setting really is for, you know, it's both the short term as well as for the long term. So it makes sense to kind of look at. So are you all in agreement that looking at how do we communicate and work and interact together and with the public is a good did I encompass everybody's, Kimberly, do you feel like that includes what you want to talk about?
I think they're intertwined.
Okay, right, I agree.
They could be 2 separate goals.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But you're right, they are, I mean, there are some specific things about community interaction, but yeah, but not necessarily. So specifically looking at the questions, what are some of them that inform you, some areas where you'd really like to make changes? Because really we're looking at mostly, this is mostly standard 5, isn't it?
You know, well, yeah, I'm looking at 5, benchmark, question 69. Communicate proactively to disseminate information that addresses issues throughout the system and community.
That's a challenge.
That's a challenge. Or even just, not even the question level, ensuring district information and decisions are communicated.
And
You
then
know.
release those times.
No, that's okay, that's okay. I'm just kind of.
Remember, we had our what was her name? Caprice Hall, and she
Oh,
said,
yeah.
interrupt.
I
I was so
I know, right?
that was so
She's great.
refreshing. I'm like,
So, you know, actually 70 and 71 are again on communicating out to the public, and 71 is getting information back from the public.
Right.
And so again, those are, you know, how does that two-way communication work?
Right.
So tell me some of your frustrations about what isn't working now, and how would you like to see it work better in that area?
We can't, I hear time and time from the community, why aren't you telling us about your successes?
Okay.
Those don't get out there, the positives that are happening. And I know that we try, but they get drowned out by the negativity.
Okay.
That's my
And definitely doing that. Challenged at this point. You know, I think I'm just gonna write this one over again. So, okay. So why aren't we hearing more about the successes?
Yes.
Okay. What else?
So this is, I mean, preaching to the choir, because we are a collective body. You know, I think you always will have that struggle in terms of communicating as an individual versus communicating as a school board. You know, I think doing the conversations with the board are very helpful, you know, because then we can have interactions with people, but it is a school board event that is scheduled on a regular basis, and we know we can rely on in terms of having two-way conversations. But besides, even as a governing body, we don't have many ways, unless people come to board meetings and watch the video, we don't really
communicate
have
with them.
many ways to, and the systems just aren't there.
Okay. What would be some ways that you do that right now?
So right now we have, a couple times a year, we go, we call it Conversations with the Board. It's kind of a, an informal time where we can sit down, we have some prompts, and we can get people's feedback and thoughts about some issues.
Okay. How do those work? I mean, do they work, not like how does it work, but are you happy with
For the
those
people
results?
who are able to, you know, get childcare for their kids and make it out on that specific night,
Okay.
I think it works.
So you have some barriers?
Yes, we have
Okay.
barriers.
Though didn't we have childcare for the Hispanic community?
Right.
Yeah,
But I
so we
think-
have some and then we don't.
Okay, so you've had some good results?
I think,
I think
even
it
though
was-
we have barriers, we could work on those, but I'm very happy with it.
Okay.
And I think the community has appreciated, at least we're making an effort.
Right,
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah, we
For sure.
definitely heard that.
Okay, so some success with
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
still a few
Yeah.
barriers,
Very positive.
Yeah,
okay?
but that's, I mean, besides people coming to board meetings, I don't know if there's really any other formalized system for us to.
What else? What other ways do you communicate with the community?
Well, we have a lot of out, so.
We have a lot of one way. One way, okay?
Letters.
Newsletters.
As a district.
As a district,
Yeah.
yeah, not as a board.
That's a good point. So those are from the district. Does the board do anything out to the community?
They all have a variety of liaison assignments, so
Okay.
they're connected to the
Oh, yeah.
PTA or the
Yeah.
foundation and
Task
all
force.
those
PTA.
task forces or CPAC or, you know, so I mean, it's not necessarily as a board, but it's as a representative of the board.
Okay. So task forces, what are some of the other ones that you mentioned?
PTA, our
Okay.
schools foundation, our special ed parent advisory group. Yeah, CPAC.
How are those working for you all? How do you think they work in terms of you being able to interact with, communicate with the community?
I think they're great. You're always kind of dealing with the last personality that you're following as the liaison of what the expectations are. So
Oh,
you kind of always have to do a little bit of what do you expect from me?
Because these are rotating roles, is that correct? Okay. Do they change yearly?
They can.
Okay.
Pretty much.
They're reviewed yearly.
Mhm. So there might be some inconsistency in terms of what each person does. Do you report those out to each other?
Oftentimes.
We try to include it in our board reports. Sometimes the night has gone crazy long.
Mhm.
And sometimes you've gone to a meeting and while there's good stuff that they're doing, like, well, you know, they raise this much money or they, you know, they're,
Right.
okay, what am I reporting back on?
Right.
Those committees report to
To the board?
the board though, in a public meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is that
At some
information
point,
given back.
Yeah.
Maybe not
Okay.
enough, but.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you not doing that you would like to see the board doing in terms of communicating with, collaborating with the public?
There's something in here about.
You know, it's, and I'm sure you deal with this too, but the people that are happy,
Mm-hmm.
we don't hear from.
Right, right.
Right, and
Right.
so how do we balance, okay, these are the groups who we're hearing from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that representative of a large portion of the community? And, you know, I don't know how to
That's a
engage.
perennial board problem.
Right,
Yeah,
how do you engage?
because nobody comes to the board and
Right.
says, you guys are doing a great job.
Right, right.
Okay, that's all I came for.
If I don't know who I am, that means I'm doing a great job.
But that's too bad, but that's a shame.
Right, so
That's-
how do we, because they obviously, they have things they're not happy with, and so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how do we understand what the larger, the issues that are really truly being felt across the community. And
Okay.
make sure that we're hearing from all those voices, and I don't know that there's an answer, but that's kind of always in my mind.
So generally, you know, if you can look at an area where you've had some success and try to expand upon that. So if you're having some success in these conversations with the board, is there a way that you could expand that to include more voices? Maybe give, you know, I've heard a couple times, helping the public understand the rationale around decisions that are made. That's a really tough one, I know, because you're privy to a lot of information as board members that the general public not necessarily isn't. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but they're, you know, it's reams of information sometimes. So even if they have access to it, who wants to read all of that? So is there a way in those conversations with the board that you can share some of that? Or can you expand it out, replicate it out in other areas to make it more successful? Or is there another idea that would work better?
Well, I thought that, I have a few thoughts here.
Mhm.
I thought that on our conversations with the board, it would be nice for each board member, and I might not have articulated this last year, I don't remember, but nice for each board member to kind of say who they are, but also to have somebody say, here's, you know, whether it's the board president or whoever is the spokesperson, say that this is what the board does, here's how we want to hear from you, and take kind of the first, even though we want to, it's about a community discussion, and we don't want to have a big PowerPoint session that takes away from our informal conversation, right? We're trying to keep it informal so that people, so that we're not the ones talking, but I think giving it a little bit of structure up front, that maybe 10 minutes,
More than we have.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think something that I really heard the community talk about that they liked was when Janet, you sent out the letter about the discrimination.
The decision on that, or the. kind of
Yes,
where we are on that.
and I
And
think,
you know, that's kind of, excuse me for interrupting.
oh, you can interrupt, because
Just kind of a continuation of that thought, though, that's kind of where I've been processing this, that there, it would be nice if there was a mechanism whereby the president or whatever, just encapsulated the arguments or the
decisions.
yeah, you know, with the data that was behind the decisions. I will tell you that being president is a big job already, so
It is a huge
it's
job.
a hard thing to take on another, but I think there's real value in a broader way, saying for people that don't come to the conversations with the board and the people that you don't see at the other meetings,
Okay.
to articulate, this was our decision, and this was some of the considerations, these were some of the considerations that we talked about, these were some of the pros and cons, and this was the reason for our ultimate decision. I think that could be really helpful.
And to add on that, I just thought of an idea here. You could delegate every board meeting to a different person
Right,
and
I was
have
gonna
the
say,
final
rotate.
letter approved through the board president
That's a good idea.
and
Share the-
Larry, for example.
Yeah.
So that each person was taking, which that doesn't burden any one person too much. But I think what's also really effective is, what Janet's saying is, you know, which we're gonna talk about later, but I see a lot of dialogue about what I hear, and I think I come from a little bit different place than Sandy, is people just sometimes aren't informed and they don't know where to find the information. So, they might see that we came to a decision on later start, or they might see that but they don't know how to access the shuttle, or they don't know how to do this or that. And if we could give them this, and I know it's somewhere on our website, right?
Right.
But I don't find it that easy to navigate, and I feel like there's not a succinct place. But I think, again, what you're saying is, yes, Larry writes his letter, but they also want to hear from the board. And ultimately, if they have a problem, it's not going to get resolved, like you saw with the discrimination and the cultural issues. That comes to us, and they're going to be telling us that, here's what we're feeling, we don't maybe know about it. So I think if we could show them what we are doing in some type of weekly newsletter, I'm sure, like Larry, a lot of people won't read it, but at least that gives us as a board something to refer back to. Because I think that's part of my frustration too, is sometimes I don't always know where to lead people to access, and especially when it comes to these bigger decisions, if we're gonna switch up the challenge, we're gonna need to have these things, this kind of framework
That's true.
set in
I think
place.
it's drawing people into the decision a little bit by sharing what we've considered. Because otherwise, if on the face of it, they don't have any idea what factors went into the
Very
decision.
true.
But if they at least understand that we have considered and discussed aspects that are important to them, then I think that that might help. It's
Can
not
we
gonna
have,
solve
can we have
everything, but it's-
hearings? Because you know how like communities, like, or cities have like hearings when they're making big decisions on issues, don't they?
Well,
Like,
you do
people come
on
and get
budgets.
testimony.
You do on budgets.
But is there other big decisions where we can have people feel like they have a voice and they can come give?
Well, I think that's the
Testimony,
idea
But we're
behind,
talking about
behind
mission, vision, and values, right?
Well, and.
You have-
Which is happening,
if we-
correct.
If we, again, yes, people can come give testimony during a board meeting, and that's why we make sure to
Correct.
publish the agenda ahead of time, but how many people really understand what's on the agenda, and that perhaps something like ninth grade sports,
Or
that's
what the
really
process
important to
is.
them. Right.
Yeah.
We invite you into this conversation.
Right.
Here's what we're going to be discussing. Here's what we did our last board meeting. And our next board meeting, we have this big decision coming up. We might not state it like that.
So that could be
such and such.
part of this, you know, here's what we did at our last board meeting, here's what's coming up at our next. Okay, several of you have referred to Larry's letter. Is this a letter that you send out to the community? What's the
Two days,
vehicle
every
there?
couple weeks.
In
Just
what,
like
through mail?
In our electronic,
Yeah.
newsletter.
Okay, could there be a board column in there?
There's a little blurb that the board does, but I don't know where that really answers a lot
It
of
just
what
says
the
what
community is
actions the
asking.
board.
Could
Yeah.
you
Doesn't really
expand it to
articulate
meet what
the
you've
rest.
talked about here, the ability to communicate with them about what decisions you've made, why you made them, and where to get more resources around that?
Yeah, and I think just it's more personal when someone's signing it and saying, you know, like, when it's,
And first,
I think if it gets buried, it's gonna be harder to find.
yeah, so you're saying there's not a large percentage of the community that reads that.
But a
But
lot
I
of
think
people
it
read
is framework
yours.
to go back on. I don't know that they did.
Well, I heard a lot of feedback on it, and at least we could send
That
some.
read Larry's.
That read both theirs when it was on that hot topic
Okay.
issue.
Well, you know, the other thing you can do is if you have the information in one format, you can share it in other ways. I mean, you can share it with the media, for example, and sometimes they'll pick pieces of that up. You can even talk to them about having a monthly column or, you know, there are a variety of ways that you can look at taking the same information and then replicating it in different outlets. You know, whether it's mailing it or emailing it or sharing it, giving it out as a handout of one of your conversations with the board,
So-
maybe.
Can I just clarify which one, what we're talking, because I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing an explanation of a big decision, challenge, grade reconfiguration, boundary changes, whatever, versus a bi-monthly, here's what happened at the last board. And those seem to me like two very different
Workloads.
things. Yeah, there's that, but two different formats of ways of communicating. One's more kind of a whole bloggy, here's what happened.
A very brief update, sort of a
Right.
newsletter
Oh,
type.
what about
Right.
the president's blog? I'm not kidding, where we have a blog online.
Okay, well but that's what I'm saying.
That to the smaller.
They can start that in
Right.
December, Janet.
See, that's what has.
We all contribute.
Quite honestly, that's what has been a challenge. There are two things that are a big challenge. It is very hard for one person to represent 5 people.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that continually challenging in the letters that I already write to the community, how to articulate the board decision in a way that honors everybody is
Yeah.
very challenging, I will tell you. And then secondly, if you, on top of the extra meetings and everything else, if you're adding another layer of communication, there's a time issue.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of the president being the filter kind of, or the, you know, I mean, the official
editor,
spokesperson, but other people contributing, or
Yeah.
other people taking
Or the
responsibility
board's blog, we
as,
call it, not maybe the president's
yeah.
blog, the board's blog.
Yeah.
But then the filter is like you said, is the president.
And then I would suggest whatever it is that you create, whether it's a blog or a newsletter column, that you take that same piece of information and try to expand the different ways that it's sent out to the community. so that you get a little bit more bang for your buck.
I think
on that
major
work.
issues, like she said, I'm hearing the two different things, major issues,
Right.
when it really affects this large, at a minor level, like whether it was later start, whether it was the racial, thing that was going on, I don't mean to say that lightly, the racial issues that were going on, that a letter to the community, and have it titled, whatever the issue is. so
Okay,
people see
and that
what's
is what
going on.
happened, right? That's what you did, and that was well received. You all, I've heard,
I
felt.
heard very good feedback.
Okay, so that's
People
good.
knew
So-
what to expect, I think. So whether they agreed with everything, that wasn't the point. They knew where we stood on the issue.
They filled a vacuum,
Yeah.
I think, where people were wondering,
So what happened from
Where
there?
they're filling in the blanks because
Right.
there isn't anything available.
And they appreciated Larry's letter too, so we're just talking.
and it was nice because it came from two different angles but still overlapped. It was,
Actually, that's true.
yeah.
And I think that's just it, the board perspective is always going to be different than that. I mean, hopefully you're marching together and you are working towards a common goal, but there is a slightly different perspective because our responsibility is different.
So the ideas we talked about would be a blog, a newsletter, a mailer, an electronic bulletin board, or an electronic newsletter, I guess, right? And those would probably piggyback on top of, I can't spell on top at the same time. Those would piggyback on top of work that is maybe already being done, that's being received effectively, whether it's Larry's letter or being handed out at the conversations with the board. Does that encapsulate what we were talking about? Okay.
Yeah, and I think letting people, like we're doing the blog or the newsletter, is just letting, I think it would take pressure, I feel like it would take some pressure off. I don't know how you guys might feel it would put pressure on, I'm not sure, to let the community know that they have a voice at this upcoming board meeting. So we're getting inundated with, information.
Right.
It might be, okay, at this board meeting, we're gonna have a discussion on our agenda of, if it's a major topic, right? I don't know how you're gonna decipher what major topics are, but,
Well, some definitely
On-
rise to the top.
Yeah,
Over
on-
others, pretty naturally.
high cap, because we know that was a hot topic issue, and people switching schools and us switching them where we're gonna have this, we value your input.
Right.
That doesn't mean we can switch everything to what people want, but I think people just a lot of times want to be heard too.
Yeah.
It isn't that they always expect it to change. They want to know that we're considering what they're saying.
And that's always a challenge.
Some people will want
Yes.
their way,
Right.
but, and then we can come
But
back
giving
and
them that
say,
opportunity is a good practice.
and then there's always, I guess, the worry about the survey with the, I think we just have to be really genuine about it and say, here's the things that we're thinking, but we want your input.
Well, yeah, I think setting expectations
Yeah.
about what,
That
this is what
means.
Leanna always tells us, right, our communication director, you have to make sure people understand what you're gonna do with the information.
Right.
The feedback they give you. So, like in conversations with the board, people will come with very specific things they want addressed, and we have to tell them that, that's not the purpose, that's not, thank you very much, we wanna hear what you're thinking, but don't expect, something to change.
So I think that was the other question here. The other component of that is educating the public on the board's roles and
Yes,
responsibilities, which we
right.
have not been very good at.
We haven't been very
And I
good at
think that would help. Also,
Right.
provide framework for which they can give their comments. And
Because I would
think
say,
you can't do one without the other.
yeah, I would say 8 times out of 10, stuff I hear about is not something at a board level.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe 7 times out of 10.
And
It's
so
more
what's-
administrative issues at a particular given school or at a particular with a particular whatever. That doesn't, and what I really encourage people to do is, okay, you hear it at this level, but this is our level, so if you do want to address the board, you need to feed it back into this level, not into this particular issue, right? That's
Okay,
where
right.
I try to communicate.
Right, right.
If you see that there's an issue here, then come speak to the board about it if you feel like there's something we can change up here.
Right. And that is an
That's why I
area.
try to turn the conversation.
Sure, and that's great practice, and you're gonna have to really make sure with the new board members that you attack you approach that issue with them too, because they'll get jumped on. Public will go to the new board members with maybe things that they haven't felt satisfied about or haven't felt heard. And one of the things you have to understand is you may feel like you haven't been heard because an action didn't take place. It was heard,
Yeah.
but it might not be the board's role, or it might not represent what's best for the larger community. So making sure that the new board members coming
And
on
that
board
they know how
the
to
role.
file complaints, which is what we're doing now.
Okay.
If they do have a particular issue at a building or with a, we might not have had clear mechanisms before.
Sure.
We're now identifying what those meant. To me, if someone wants to complain about something, wants to file a complaint and wants to work on it, that's
Mhm.
their prerogative.
Let them do that.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have 20,000 students. We're gonna have people that aren't gonna be serviced, maybe the way they should have been, or that are gonna have an issue. And I wanna be able to say, hey, you can go have your voice, go manage it this way, right? And then that takes it off me.
Well, and with the subject matter experts who can really help work through that issue.
So let me ask you about the other part of this question, which was how do we work to get and interact together? Productively, cooperatively. I did that one better, didn't I?
Very proud, very proud.
We're gonna just spend just a few minutes on that, but are there,
More interaction?
looking forward, I mean, not just the next 2 months, but looking forward for the coming year, what are some improvements to the way you can work together and help your new board members understand what are the best practices for being able to work together, for managing differences of opinion and differences of viewpoint? That is a strength of a board. You actually, it's a much better board if you have different perspectives and backgrounds, but you have to realize, how do we then have that be a strength rather than something that tears the board apart or makes it difficult for the board to make decisions. So what would you like to see moving forward that would be different, or maybe do more of the same if something is working in terms of how you work together collaboratively and make decisions?
So when we did for me, just because I happen to be putting a lot of time into it, how we took care of redoing the superintendent evaluation, I thought worked really well. People definitely had different ideas, but I thought we worked really well as a group and came up with good ideas. Specifically, I wasn't, it was easy to take a model from WASDA, but then how do you attach the schedule to it and how it interacts with what we did? That I thought was a very good model of how we could take different attitudes and opinions and experiences and get a good product out at the end.
Why did that work well? What were the elements about that worked well?
What I could describe how it worked well.
No,
Why?
how could you take, if that was a process that everybody felt was productive, worked well, what are the elements of that you could see bringing to the next challenge that you as a board need to face?
Well, and this is something that I personally, I don't know the answer to, because it worked well, and it could have been something that could have been very tricky, but it wasn't. I don't know what, and maybe if folks have an attitude or an opinion about how it was structured, maybe because we did it very formally. I don't know if that impacted when it worked. Maybe people don't agree with me that it worked.
What do the rest of you think? Did that process work well? And if so, what did you like about it?
I'm thinking that we took time to build it, maybe. That's a component of what helped. It was
Some steps
it
to
was
it.
a conversation over time that it was a pretty fluid conversation. It wasn't just a.
Maybe everyone saw the need, maybe that comment.
I just think it too became objective, and so it wasn't about personal opinion as much, or something out there, or something that wasn't tangible as much. We were able to tie it. We didn't necessarily have, I think the thing about this, the superintendent evaluation is we didn't necessarily have consensus on everything. I mean, there were areas where we weren't necessarily together.
Sure.
And that's okay. And
Right.
this whole thing of having to always have board consensus, not you, but just this drive in general for training and stuff, I think some of the times we work the best, honestly, is when maybe we've had a 3-2 vote and we've been able to go, okay, that's where everybody's at, and we're not trying to twist each other's arm
Mhm.
to get everybody to think like us, even though we have the discussion about it, right?
Right.
It seems that when we've respected each other's decisions, that, and then I think in that framework, we were able to, even though it was like, not, we didn't see it the same way, we were still able to say, okay,
Okay.
you're over here, but what's the best way for us to kind of come in the middle, even though we don't agree? Or see it exactly
Right.
the same way, or through
Okay.
the same filter.
Okay. Did the rubric help that process?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering is if there's some, you know, if you have a tool to use to help you make some of those decisions, which you don't always, although what we talked about earlier is trying to really look at research and I mean, we talked about that with the budget in terms of looking at, you know, what are the board's priorities, how do they match up to the budget, what are the budget, you know, what budget flexibilities do we have or do we not. That gives you more information to make a better decision. The same thing, you know, when you're looking at even this conversation that we just had about making sure that the public feels that they have an opportunity to not only understand what you do. So is the piece giving you more information on which to base your decisions and have your conversation?
I'm an information person.
Part of it, okay?
Yeah, having a framework that
Having a framework? Okay.
everybody pretty much bought into, I think, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that there was a lot of trust for Amy to find a framework that made the most sense for our district, that I don't think anybody was questioning the intent behind why
Okay.
that framework was chosen, and that definitely helped then for buy-in to work on it, right? That we all trusted that this was why it was chosen, and so trust.
What do you do when there's not trust?
That's where we run into challenges, for sure. Absolutely.
How do you get past that as a group? Can you talk that out? I mean, I know it's
No,
It's
we don't
really-
get past it.
it's really difficult.
I'll echo.
And it's especially
Just to be honest,
difficult when you're talking in public and you're being videotaped and there are people watching. And it's really hard to say, I don't trust that you have good intent around this process. That's very difficult. What are some ways that,
Well, I know if
some
someone
ways
said
to
to me
work?
that they didn't trust I had good intent, that would be very upsetting to me.
Mhm.
Because I don't think any of us have malintent. I think that we all have different ways of looking at it, I really do. And I think that through that, we get frustrated.
Mhm.
That has been said.
That has been good to
So that's where the
Actually,
challenge
me
comes
too.
in.
Yeah, so that's.
But I mean, I think we all, you know, the community seeing, I hear it too, I'm sure Dawn hears it, I don't want to speak for her, but I mean,
Here's what, that they
What
don't
they're-
trust the process, or they don't trust the people.
They don't trust that we're doing this with the best interest of kids.
I'm hearing, I don't hear that.
I've heard
I don't
from
hear
another
that.
board member
Yeah.
that they
From
don't
the-
trust that I'm in it for the right reasons or
Oh,
that I
right.
have positive intent.
So
So
I don't
that
think that
colors
has anyone
the-
here,
Right.
FYI.
Right.
that colors the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
makes it-
difficult to get past that because
Yeah.
I think there are 5 of us that do have completely different perspectives. I think there are 5 of us that absolutely are here with the best interest of kids in mind, and we have a very different
But they look
view of
different.
what that means.
Okay.
You know, so I think that
So I'm hearing all 4 of you say that, and so what do you do when someone says, I don't trust your intent? I mean, I think, again, we're missing a board member, but the 5 of you, or the 4 of you, if you're in agreement about that, need to be able to somehow come up with a way to say, please don't question my intent. We all agree that we're here for the best intent. We might have different ways of looking at it.
Well, I think out of I'll say for me, out of frustration in trying to be, in frustration of some of these conversations,
Mhm.
then I think we do get into battles. Does that make sense?
It
Where
does.
then, I think each of us becomes compromised. I think I've almost seen all of us become compromised to a certain extent with how we would normally engage. And
Okay.
versus, you know, I think each of us has felt compromised in that and gotten into kind of downward slope, and then at that point gotten more targeted or made it more personal or gotten frustrated, or maybe we wouldn't have normally done that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yes, how